Good morning, friends. It's Monday, November 10th in Cascadia. That's a bioregion. Pacific Northwest, Pacific Coast, northwest corner of what we sometimes call the lower 48. If you're from outside the United States, you probably don't hear all the jargon about, lower 48 as an example. We've got the flyover states, and it is kind of mean to call those the flyover states. I've gone around in those states. They're fun. I highly recommend if you visit Oregon that you also consider stopping along the way somewhere like Illinois. Doesn't have to be Chicago. I don't know what all the airports are actually that you would fly into. Cleveland maybe, but whether Cleveland's in a flyover state, I mean, Ohio, come on. That's like part of the East Coast almost. I had a funny story once where I was talking to an old lady. I was still a younger guy at Florida Avenue meeting. This is a meeting, it sounds like in Florida, but no, it's in Washington, D.C., I believe, established with assistance from President Hoover. The story I heard was President Hoover, who was a Quaker, was really fed up with another certain person who always talked in meeting and it was just annoying. And so they started this whole second meeting so that President Hoover could be free of this individual. That's something I heard anyway. So I'm at Florida Avenue meeting talking to this lady there, and I say I grew up in Portland. I tell her, and she says, "Oh, or is that what I told her? Or maybe I told her I know what I told her. I said I grew up out west, like Cascadia is what I was thinking." And she goes, "Ohio?" And I'm no, way in Portland. And she kind of looked at me blankly, and I said near Seattle. And she sort of lit up and she said, "Wow, I hear it's really built up out there." To me, that was a funny thing to say because, of course, Seattle is, yeah, built up. I mean, come on. The East Coast, to our eyes, looks rather dilapidated, you might say. I tell people applying to Princeton that I sometimes interview, I'm like, have you seen The Joker? You remember? Like where they shot Bruce Wayne's parents in that alleyway? I used to walk through that alleyway all the time. Where they shot that piece of film, I think I've determined is alongside the Lowe's Theater across from Journal Square Path Station. And that was my neighborhood. Anyway, just saying, the East Coast is lagging behind the West Coast. We've always thought of California as like 3 years ahead. That used to be a rule of thumb somehow. And what does that mean exactly? How can you be further ahead? What does that even mean? And I think, in my meditations, I think, what time is it is a deep question. It sounds like we could have Einstein. If you do an AI cartoon about this, like with Sorrow or one of those, like fade into a bunch of clocks with Einstein's visage, with the talk balloon or something, question, what time is it? Because some of us are still debating biblical versus Darwin, like evolution, should it be taught in schools and stuff. To me, that's living in the 1800s. And there are people like that right now today who are still like, their mental framework is sort of Scopes trial era. But I think just as surely there are people who live that far into the future relative to most of us. Their mindset is 10, 20 years ahead of where most of us are right now, too. So if you look at people as clocks and you try to say, what time is it? I think the answer is there's no real agreement. There's no consensus on what time it is. So with that little opening, I just wanted to now move from time to space and mention that in my last journey by car to the farm, the work-study farm, I'll call it, if you've seen Cascadian Synergetics, and if you haven't, the executive summary, I think it's called, I'll have a link at the end of this YouTube. It's a farm I do work-study learn about tractors and seasons and all the things you got to know if you're going to run a farm, right? Hands on. Irrigation, big part of it, of course. So much to know. And this time, coming back from there, instead of coming back on I-5 like usual, I went up alongside the McKenzie River up to the Santiam Pass where there was snow, and then down by Black Buttes through Sisters to basically Terrebonne, which is near Smith Rock, a destination climbing challenge for some people. They come from all over the world to climb Smith Rock. And then on from Smith Rock, I went deliberately east from there and joined up Highway 26 up to Madras, and then I took 26 onward from Madras. No, that's what I didn't do. I normally would take 26 from Madras over the south shoulder of Mount Hood back to Portland, but this time I stayed on I-97 North up to I-197 North, and I went through Dufur for the first time, and it was really a great experience, and I really recommend Dufur as a fun, authentic Oregon old town. You know, the sort of the hub in its own little district, way nestled deep in the rolling hills on the other side of Mount Hood from Portland. So as far from Mount Hood on the other side, pretty much as Portland is on the west side. Due south pretty much of the Dalles, which is a huge hydroelectric dam there, the Dalles, and that is part of my Martian math curriculum. Cascadian Synergetics dovetails into what we call Martian math, which could mean anything, right? But it's very science fiction heavy, and part of the plot of one of our science fiction, you could say, epics. Think of a TV series, but not just one. You know, any teacher can twist it in any different way, or any student. It's like clay, this story, but the Martians or the ETs are here to help or learn from. We want to have a two-way street in terms of us learning from them and vice versa, and the whole thing is to work together on building a hydropower dam. And, you know, the grid that comes out from it, the whole thing, they want to learn all that from us, and we're interested in their math. They have some interesting twists. You know, we wonder always, do ETs have the same math as humans? Don't they have to, kind of, ultimately? Like, how many maths can there be? And then some people would say, well, of course they don't have the same math. But, you know, it's more fun if you have a real example and a reason to introduce an alternative kind of math. And that's where we've got our synergetics, the Buckminster Fuller stuff, the Bucky stuff, as I call it, right? If you're not new to this channel, if you've been listening to my talk, then this is not new on what I'm saying here, right? So after that drive, and then back to Portland along 84 through Hood River and stuff. After that was Halloween, and there's been, you know, a lot of fun activity. And in the background, just for those of you who are into teaching this stuff, the synergetic stuff, I just wanted to end with a few more tips, like in the Quadrays deck here. I'm going to go to that slide where it shows an old web page from what's called the Math Forum, which has been reconfigured since those days, and this particular page won't be there right now, but it goes to my website at grunch.net, which does still exist at this point, hosted by GoDaddy. And there you will find what are called the Quadray papers, and these go back. This is like in the early days, and you'll like scroll down in the introduction page, and I haven't touched it. I've even seen typos I haven't fixed, but my interest here is more archaeological at this point. I kind of keep this website behind glass with the whole of the GrunchNet Synergetics, just to show where it was, how it is in the 1990s at this point. And there's a distance formula here, and it's not the one I usually use. And I thought, hey, here we are in 2025. Let's use this distance formula and check the assumption. What it says is it doesn't matter how you normalize, and we use that word in a certain way, make the quadray come out in a canonical, sort of one-of-a-kind, unique way for each point in space. We just want to have one right way, you could say, or one best way, even though there are many ways to do it. When we talk about normalizing a quadray, we could have it be that the four quadray numbers always add to zero. That's one way we could do it. But instead, we have it a different way where one of the coordinates is always zero and the others are positive. We've been through that. But what if we go to what sometimes we do like that other way to normalize around zero? Because if we do that, then we can do a really simple distance formula, and that's the one I've normally used. Now, what's interesting and crazy about quadrays, and I always tell people, you need to kind of know what XYZ coordinates are to get the full value from the quadrays as an experience of learning them. Like, get to XYZ first. Descartes, Fermat. Where did the idea of three dimensions come from? If you want to get historical, I go back to Matteo Ricci and the invention of Renaissance painting perspective, and showing that off to the Chinese as like pinnacle of Western civilization, because it was. At the time when it first came out, to be able to paint in perspective, wow, that was something to share with the world. Like if you had ETs coming, you would show it to them too. Look at this. We can do like 3D pictures on a 2D canvas, but they didn't say it that way yet. 2D, 3D like that, it's more comes later, I think, in terms of informal talk anyway. So with the synergetics, we have other ways of talking, as you've heard here, perhaps, but we also, want to do the quadrays in a way that helps us understand that way of talking, right? And so what I'm showing here is how, yes, you can use the old introduction to quadrays distance formula, both the way we normalize it now and normalize around zero. And then here's the original distance function with normalizing around zero. So all three of these should give the same answer. And one way you can show that to yourself is without sitting down and doing a proof or some kind of algebraic thing. Another way to approach confirmation that these are all giving the same answer is just arbitrarily change the name so that whichever one is called length, that's the one that'll get unit tested. Like a lot of unit tests will invoke it, and then change the name so that another one is called length, and call the other ones like 2 and 3 or 1 and 2 like that. So the one called length will get a workout in the unit tests. And the way to get those unit tests to run, and I'm going to suggest two modules you're going to want to test. There's this one where the quadrays are defined as Q vectors as a subclass of vectors. And it has its unit test at the bottom, and if you just type the name Python at a console, you invoke the interpreter Python, here 311, just say Python space qrays.py, and if that's what you do, you just run the program like raw at the command line. That just triggers it to do unit tests. That's how it's designed. Because normally you just import QRays in something else. You're doing something where you're going to need quadrays, so you say import QRays, and nothing runs. It's just imported, and now you can use whatever's in there. That's the usual way to use it. But if you run it directly as a program from, like we'll call it top level, that triggers the unit tests. And that's true likewise of tetravolume. .py, which is the other one I suggest you run the unit test. Just say Python space tetravolume.py and run that, and it'll run all the unit tests. And because you're in the background, every time between running unit tests, you can change which one of these three functions is the one you want to call length. And when the tests keep passing, which is shown by little dots, as opposed to F for failure and E for error, F is it's just false. You make an assertion, A equals B. It's either true, test passes. It's false, you get an F. Or it's worse than false, it like makes no sense. You can't even say it's false. It's just an incorrect assumption. Like there's something to test involving equality. They're completely anyway, error is sort of beyond the pale, and what you do in test-driven development, which is a philosophy of writing code, is you focus on the tests first ahead of time. You write a bunch of tests, and then you start writing code right away against the tests. And passing the tests, it's like bootstrapping your code. As you write more and more tests, your code passes more and more tests. You gradually shape the end product you're looking for. It's an interesting approach, actually. But even if you don't apply that religiously, having unit tests as a part of your workflow, highly recommended. And that can be adapted back to things like farming or other like physical activities. What counts as unit tests on a farm? I'm not going to go into what would be the answer, but I think you can think of some as time goes on. What are the like little tests you need to do just to like maintenance checks to make sure things are ship shape, right? You always want to run them or do those checks, kind of like in airplanes when you do a checklist. So I'm just saying the computer science side of life can inform your everyday life, and that's a two-way street, especially when it comes to thinking about scheduling, multitasking, queuing. I've talked about that before. I blog about that, those kind of things. Use your everyday life, your everyday experiences with multitasking to help think about computer science, and vice versa. All right, talk to you again. Bye-bye.